It began with confusion. High above the Pacific Ocean, Japanese fighter pilots were experiencing something they had rarely felt since the war began. It was not fear, not yet. It was something far more dangerous. Doubt. The date was June 1942. The place was the skies near Midway Atoll. For months, Japanese naval aviators had dominated the Pacific. Their Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters had earned a fearsome reputation. Fast, agile, and flown by some of the most experienced pilots in the world, the Zero seemed almost untouchable. Many American pilots had already learned a hard lesson. Trying to outturn a Zero was often a death sentence. Japanese aces knew it. American pilots knew it. And that was exactly the problem. On this particular day, a Japanese pilot spotted what looked like another easy. An American fighter appeared alone and vulnerable. He moved into position. The attack seemed routine. He had done this dozens of times before. Then something strange happened. The American aircraft did not turn away. It did not dive. It did not try to fight like every other fighter. Instead, it did something completely unexpected. Within seconds, the Japanese pilot found himself unable to get a clean. His target seemed protected by an invisible shield. Again and again, American fighters were beginning to survive encounters that should have ended in disaster. Across the Pacific, Japanese pilots started noticing the same thing. The Americans were changing. And behind that change stood one pilot with one simple idea. His name was Lieutenant Commander John Smith. Long before his tactic became famous, Thach was already known as a thoughtful officer. Born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas in 1905, he graduated from the United States Naval Academy and became a naval aviator during an era when air combat was still developing. Unlike some pilots who relied purely on instinct, Thach loved studying problems. He paid attention. He analyzed. He questioned assumptions. Those habits would eventually save countless lives. Before the United States entered the war, reports about Japanese aircraft began reaching American intelligence officers. Information suggested that Japan possessed a highly maneuverable fighter aircraft. Many officers dismissed the reports. Thach did not. He wanted facts. He wanted numbers. He wanted to understand exactly what American pilots might face. As intelligence reports accumulated, a troubling picture emerged. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero could outturn almost every American carrier fighter in service. The U.S. Navy's primary fighter at the time was the Grumman F-4F Wildcat. The Wildcat was rugged and heavily armed. It could absorb punishment that would destroy many aircraft. But it was not as agile as the. If American pilots entered traditional turning dogfights, they would likely lose. Thach understood the danger immediately. Many military leaders focus on equipment. Thach focused on tactics. If the airplane could not be changed quickly, perhaps the way it was flown could. That idea started a chain of events that would reshape air combat in the Pacific. In late 1941, before many Americans had even heard of Pearl Harbor, Thach began conducting tactical exercises with fellow pilots. He imagined different combat situations. He studied possible enemy attacks. Most importantly, he searched for a way for two fighters to protect each other. The breakthrough came during a simple exercise. Imagine two fighters flying side by side with some distance between them. An enemy fighter attacks one aircraft from behind. Normally, the targeted pilot would be forced into a defensive maneuver. But what if both friendly fighters turned toward each other simultaneously? As they crossed paths, the attacking enemy would suddenly find himself exposed to the guns of the second fighter. The concept was elegant. Simple. Deadly. Thach called it the beam defense position. History would remember it by another name, the Thach Weave. On paper, it looked almost too simple. Many revolutionary ideas do. The real question was whether it would work against experienced Japanese pilots. That answer would come soon. December 7, 1941 changed everything. The attack on Pearl Harbor pushed the United States into war. Suddenly, theories became reality. Pilots who had trained for years now faced actual combat. Japanese forces advanced rapidly across the Pacific. American bases fell. Allied forces retreated. Japanese confidence grew. Their aviators had every reason to feel unstoppable. Many had years of combat experience gained during operations in China. Some had accumulated impressive victory records. Against inexperienced Allied pilots, they often dominated. But beneath the surface, a shift was already beginning. Thach and his squadron prepared for battle. They knew the Zero's strengths. More importantly, they knew its weaknesses. The Zero achieved its remarkable maneuverability by sacrificing protection. It lacked heavy armor. Its fuel tanks were vulnerable. Its pilots depended on avoiding hits rather than absorb. If American pilots could survive long enough to shoot accurately, they had a chance. The challenge was surviving. That was where the weave came in. The tactic demanded discipline. Pilots had to trust each other completely. Instead of fighting as individuals, they fought as a team. That was a major change. Air combat had often celebrated lone heroes and individual skill. Thach emphasized cooperation, mutual protection, shared responsibility. In many ways, the tactic reflected modern combat principles long before they became standard. The first major opportunity to test the idea arrived during the Battle of Midway in June 1942. Midway would become one of the most important battles of the Pacific War. Japanese forces hoped to destroy America's remaining aircraft carriers. Instead, they would suffer a devastating defeat. For Thach, Midway also became a proving ground. During one engagement, Thach and his wingman encountered multiple Japanese fighters. The odds favored the Japanese. Their aircraft could turn tighter. Their pilots were highly skilled. Everything suggested the Americans should be at a disadvantage. Then, the weave began. As Japanese fighters attacked, the American aircraft crossed paths repeatedly. Every attack created a new problem for the pursuers. One moment they chased a target. The next moment they faced incoming gunfire. Again and again, the pattern repeated. The attackers could not isolate a single aircraft. Every attempt exposed them to danger. What looked like two fighters suddenly behaved like a coordinated defensive machine. Japanese pilots found themselves trapped by a problem they had not expected. Their traditional tactics no longer worked. The change was psychological as much as physical. For years, Japanese aviators had relied on superior maneuverability. Now, maneuverability alone was not enough. The enemy had adapted. Combat reports after Midway confirmed what Thach suspected. The tactic worked. Not because it made American fighters superior, not because it eliminated risk, but because it changed the terms of the fight. Instead of competing in the Zero's strongest area, American pilots forced engagements into situations where teamwork mattered more than turning performance. That distinction was crucial. Throughout history, successful military leaders often win by changing the game rather than playing it better. Thach had done exactly that. As the Pacific War continued, lessons from Midway spread through the fleet. More squadrons adopted the weave, more pilots trained together. More engagements ended differently than Japanese commanders expected. The impact grew steadily. By late 1942 and into 1943, the balance in the air was beginning to shift. New American aircraft entered service, pilot training improved, industrial production surged, yet tactics remained a critical part of the equation. Even the best aircraft can fail if used poorly. Even an average aircraft can succeed when flown intelligently. The Thach Weave became proof of that principle. Japanese aviators gradually encountered opponents who were increasingly difficult to defeat. The easy victories of the early war became less common. Every month, American pilots gained experience. Every month, Japanese losses became harder to replace. The numbers started telling a dangerous story. Before the war, Japan had invested enormous effort in producing elite pilots. Training standards were exceptionally demanding. The result was a small group of highly skilled aviators. The downside was replacement. When experienced pilots died, replacing them was difficult. America approached the problem differently. The United States built a massive training system capable of producing large numbers of pilots. As tactics improved, those pilots became increasingly effective. The Weave helped bridge the experience gap during a critical period. It bought time for new aircraft, time for training, time for American industry to reach full strength. By 1944, the air war looked very different. Aircraft such as the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair challenged Japanese fighters on more equal terms. American naval aviation expanded dramatically. Carrier task forces roamed the Pacific. The initiative shifted. Yet many pilots still remembered the lesson that Thach had taught. Technology mattered. Teamwork mattered more. Years after the war, historians examined countless battles, aircraft specifications, and combat records. Again and again, one conclusion appeared. The Thach Weave was not merely a maneuver. It was a mindset. It represented adaptation under pressure. It showed how thoughtful leadership could overcome technical disadvantages. Most importantly, it demonstrated that combat is not always won by the strongest machine. Sometimes it is won by the smartest idea. Japanese aces were not defeated because they suddenly became less skilled. Many remained extraordinary pilots. What changed was the environment around them. The Americans learned. They adjusted. They refused to keep fighting the same battle the same way. That adaptability became one of the defining characteristics of Allied success in the Pacific. For John Thach, the achievement was remarkable. He did not invent a new airplane. He did not command a giant fleet. He did not possess overwhelming resources. He simply recognized a problem before others did and found a practical. The solution spread from squadron to squadron, pilot to pilot, carrier to carrier. Eventually, it influenced generations of fighter tactics. Today, military academies still study examples of innovation under pressure. The lesson remains timeless. When facing an opponent with a clear advantage, copying them is rarely the answer. Finding a new approach is often far more powerful. That is exactly what happened in the skies of the Pacific. A Japanese ace would spot an American fighter and expect another routine victory. Then the fighters would begin crossing paths, the angles would change, the trap would close, and suddenly the hunter was the one in danger. What started as a simple training idea became one of the most influential aerial tactics of World War II. It helped American pilots survive some of the hardest battles of the Pacific. It disrupted the confidence of elite enemy aviators. And it proved that one good idea, developed by one determined pilot, could alter the course of an entire air war. Long after the engines fell silent and the carriers returned home, the legacy remained. Because the story was never really about airplanes. It was about adaptation. It was about thinking differently when everyone else followed old rules. And on the day Japanese aces realized their greatest advantage was no longer enough, the balance of power in the Pacific began to change forever.